What would you do if your family believed your dreams were beneath them? If every conversation, every holiday dinner, every sideways glance whispered the same message, "You'll never be enough, I'm Dara Mitchell. I'm 29 years old. And tonight, after 5 long years of silence, I'm about to sit down with my entire family at the very table they reserved to flaunt their status, completely unaware they're dining at the restaurant I built from scratch. They don't know I own it. They think I'm still struggling, probably working the kitchen at some back alley bistro. And honestly, that's exactly what I wanted them to think, because I didn't come tonight to show off. I came to finally bury the last trace of guilt they ever planted in me for not fitting the mold. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut meant one thing: reputation. The Mitchells didn't just live in privilege, we embodied it. Our lives were curated for society columns. Sunday brunch at the yacht club, designer gowns for school fundraisers, private tutors' fencing lessons, Ivy League grooming camps. Our colonial mansion with its endless white columns and symmetrically trimmed hedges looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. But inside, it was a pressure cooker. My parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell, were obsessed with perfection, not love, not support, just appearance. My older sister, Heather, was their crown jewel, Yale Law head of the debate club, fluent in 3 languages by 15. And Ethan, my younger brother, was already winning regional math competitions before most kids learned long division. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who liked to be in the kitchen more than the country club, the one who smelled like garlic and rosemary instead of Chanel No. 5, the one who didn't belong. Whenever my mother hosted her infamous garden parties, she paraded Heather and Ethan like royal heirs. When eyes finally turned to me, she'd smile just a little too tightly and say, "Dara has creative inclinations. She's still finding her path." What she meant was Dara's the disappointment, the stain on our sterling name. But the kitchen was my refuge. Elena, our housekeeper from Greece, practically raised me in that space. While my parents sipped cocktails on the terrace, I was learning how to properly dice an onion, how to let dough rest just enough to rise like air. "You have the hands for this," Elena would whisper as I kneaded bread beside her. "The way you taste, the way you smell, you understand food in your soul." By 13, I was inventing my own dishes. By 16, I was hosting underground dinners for my friends when my parents were away. While Heather was climbing debate podiums and Ethan dissected complex theorems, I was plating seared duck with port reduction for teenagers who didn't know what port even was. I thought maybe that passion would be enough, that my parents would see it. But I was wrong. When I told them I wanted to attend culinary school during junior year of high school, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Mitchells hire chefs, Dara," he said flatly. "They don't become them." Instead, I was strong-armed into Dartmouth. Business degree, of course. Legacy track. My grandfather had gone there and his father before him. Every Mitchell was expected to follow the blueprint, but even there, I found cracks to slip through. I snuck into food science electives. I audited nutrition classes. I started a secret supper club in my apartment, 5-course tasting menus for other students. The fees helped fund weekend workshops with local chefs. On paper, I was just another business major. In my heart, I was already building something no spreadsheet could measure. And then came the night that changed everything. It was spring semester of my MBA program. I was 6 months deep into misery, hating every class, every suit, every forced networking event when Chef Laurent Bissett visited campus. A legend. 3 Michelin stars. A man who made the culinary world stop when he spoke. I had volunteered to help cater the university's reception for him. I made a lamb reduction infused with rosemary and sumac. He tasted it, then asked the head caterer who made it. I did. I told him, terrified. He stared at me for a moment, then handed me his card. "You are wasting your talent here," he said, thick French accent and all. "Come to my kitchen in New York. I will make you great." 2 weeks later, I dropped out of my MBA program, and I told my parents. The silence was deafening. Then came the rage. My father's voice was a low growl. "We invested everything into your education." "No," I said quietly. "You invested in controlling me, not in seeing me." My mother didn't say a word. She just shook her head and turned away. Heather, home from her first year at Yale, laughed. "Always the rebel," she said coldly. "Let's see how long you last sweating over a stove for minimum wage. Ethan—" He didn't say anything, just looked away as if I'd embarrassed him in front of the room. I left that night with a single suitcase and my personal savings, and not a word from any of them since. Until now. The past 5 years were the hardest and the most freeing of my life. I moved into a cramped apartment in Queens with 3 roommates, worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, burned my hands, ruined my shoes, cried in walk-in freezers when I was too exhausted to keep going. But under Chef Laurent's mentorship, I didn't just survive, I flourished. I learned discipline, artistry, leadership. I worked my way up in his kitchen from peeling onions to becoming his sous chef in just 18 months. Every scar on my fingers became a badge of honor. Then came Maison. At a private event for one of Laurent's elite clients, a man named James Warren of Warren Capital tasted one of my dishes and asked to meet the chef. He said it was the most innovative flavor profile he'd encountered in a decade. 2 weeks later, he called with an offer, "Let's build a restaurant around you." And we did. Maison opened 2 years ago in a converted Soho nightclub. I poured everything into it. Designed the menu, curated the wines, interviewed every line cook, picked every piece of china and glassware myself. 6 months in, we were turning a profit. 9 months in, I bought out James and his partners with a loan I secured against Maison's growth projections. I became the sole proprietor and executive chef. No one from my family knew. I'd blocked their numbers, sent impersonal holiday cards out of courtesy. I kept my life private. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted my success to stand alone, unfiltered by their judgment or backhanded compliments. And then last week, an envelope showed up at Maison's front desk, an engraved invitation to my sister Heather's engagement dinner, hosted at Maison. I laughed when I read it, a deep, ironic laugh that echoed through the empty dining room. They had no idea. Of course they didn't. Maison had become one of the hardest reservations in the city. The name carried clout, exclusive, high-profile clientele, perfect for a Mitchell event. They probably booked it thinking it was just another feather in their social cap. I debated for days whether to attend. Part of me wanted to burn the invitation. Another part, an older wound that still hadn't fully scarred, wanted to be seen, not for their approval, but for my own closure. I finally decided to go, not to prove anything, not to gloat, but to show up on my own terms and see for the first time how I felt in their presence now that I no longer needed anything from them. Tonight, as I stood in front of Maison's polished glass doors, my heart was pounding in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger, just finality. Inside, the soft scent of saffron, roasted garlic, and warm citrus greeted me like an old friend. I wore a black Diane von Furstenberg dress, simple, elegant. My grandmother's pearls hair in a tight chignon, understated power, the kind that didn't beg for recognition. Marcus, my most senior server, spotted me immediately. His eyes widened and I gave him a subtle shake of my head. Not yet. Not tonight. He nodded and slipped back into his professional rhythm. From the entryway, I could already see them. My mother in a cream Chanel suit. My father swirling wine like he owned the vineyard. Heather predictably glowing in Gucci, sitting beside a man with slicked-back hair and a designer watch that screamed trying too hard. That had to be Bradley. Ethan was there too, with his wife Allison, both dressed like they'd come straight from a board meeting. They had no idea who they were about to dine with. No clue that every dish, every wine pairing, every flicker of candlelight at their table had been hand-selected by the very person they dismissed. Celeste, our hostess, approached. "Good evening, miss." She caught herself, smiled, and adjusted. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to the table?" "Thank you, Celeste," I said, my voice steady. It felt strange to walk into Maison as a guest, even stranger to do it without my chef's coat. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe in that calculating way I remembered all too well. A quick valuation, a silent judgment. "Darling," she said, rising to kiss the air beside my cheek. "You've finally arrived." We were beginning to wonder. "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied, glancing at my watch. 7:30 on the dot. My father stood to greet me with a stiff hug and an awkward back pat. "You look healthy," he said. Mitchell code. "You've gained weight." Heather barely acknowledged me. "This is Bradley," she said, gesturing to her fiancé. He extended his hand with a grip that screamed boardroom dominance. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA," he said by way of introduction. "Junior partner at Goldman." "Of course." "No, nice to meet you." "No, I've heard so much. Just LinkedIn credentials. Typical Mitchell love language." Allison offered a warmer smile. Ethan looked sheepish but friendly. "We've already ordered champagne," my mother informed me as I sat down. "I hope that's acceptable." I glanced at the bottle. They'd picked the second most expensive one. Lavish, but not reckless. That was my parents' brand. As the first course approached, the restaurant buzzed softly around us, the hum of quiet conversations, silverware on porcelain laughter in distant corners. Every light, every sound, every plate had my fingerprints on it. But tonight I was just the black sheep, just the disappointment pretending to keep up. Or so they thought. Jessica, one of my most trusted servers, approached our table with the amuse-bouche, a delicate sphere of compressed watermelon topped with fermented black garlic, and a microgreen harvested from an indoor farm I'd been nurturing a partnership with for over a year. "Compliments of the kitchen," she said warmly, placing a single jewel-like bite in front of each guest. Her eyes met mine briefly, and in that single glance we exchanged a whole conversation. "You okay? You sure about this?" I gave a tiny nod. I wasn't okay, but I was ready. Heather wrinkled her nose at the amuse. "Is this it?" she asked flatly, not even pretending to keep her voice down. "I'm starving." "It's a palate opener," I explained calmly. "The meal hasn't started yet." "I know what an amuse-bouche is, Dara," she snapped. "I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law instead of playing with food." My father popped the bite in whole. Didn't even chew. My mother delicately bit off one edge, calculating the calories in her head. Bradley, for reasons unknown, swirled the plate like a wine glass, sniffed it, then popped it into his mouth as if expecting it to whisper stock tips. Only Ethan and Allison actually took a moment to appreciate the flavor. Heather, of course, left hers untouched. "I don't do raw garlic," she said. "It's too aggressive." "It's fermented," I replied, still keeping my tone even. "It's been aged for 60 days. The harshness is gone. It's sweet, almost balsamic." She rolled her eyes and picked up her phone instead. I felt a flash of heat in my chest, not embarrassment. Anger, but not for myself, for my team. For Jessica, who had plated those amuse-bouche with absolute precision. For the urban farmers growing greens just to match our seasonal tasting menus. For every sous chef who bled, burned, and bent over a prep table for 12 hours straight to perfect every plate that left our kitchen. But I swallowed that fire and smiled. So I said, shifting the focus, "Tell me about the wedding plans." Heather lit up, finally a subject she wanted to discuss. St. Thomas Church, she said, preening. Reception at the plaza. 100 guests, maybe more. Though Mom thinks we should cut it back to 350. "We're running into social complications," my mother interjected. "The Astor Williams aren't speaking to the Bennett since that unfortunate yacht incident, so we'll have to be careful with seating arrangements." I blinked. Was this a royal summit or a wedding? 400 guests feels excessive, I said cautiously. Bradley leaned in. "It's networking, not just a celebration. Half of those invitations are relationship investments." My father nodded sagely. Exactly. Bradley understands the social capital. A wedding like this opens doors. "And what about you, Dara?" Heather turned to me suddenly, her smile thin. "Any prospects on your horizon, or are you still too busy with your cooking?" I looked down at the heirloom tomato starter in front of her house-made ricotta basil oil and tomatoes hand-picked at dawn. She hadn't touched it. "I'm focused on my career right now," I said simply. "Career?" Ethan chuckled, more out of habit than cruelty. "Is that what we're calling it?" My mother jumped in, her voice all sugar and concern. "Dara, dear, surely by 29 you're thinking about settling down. Margaret Whitley's son is still single, you know, hospital administration, very stable. I'm not looking to be set up." "Mother, well, your options do get more limited with age," she said lightly, as if discussing milk going bad, "especially in your situation." Before I could respond, Jessica returned to clear the untouched starters. "Is there a problem with the dish?" she asked Heather, keeping her tone professionally warm. "Too acidic," Heather said without looking up, "and the tomatoes could have been riper." My jaw clenched. Those tomatoes had been picked that very morning, ripened on the vine. I knew the exact plot of land they came from. "I'm so sorry to hear that," Jessica replied smoothly. "I'll be sure to inform the kitchen." She shot me a discreet glance of apology. I nodded. It wasn't her fault. We both knew this was about more than food. The second course arrived seared scallops with brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps. "This looks promising," my father said, as if that were a generous concession. Bradley swirled his wine again, sniffed it, then offered his thoughts. "Decent wine list," he announced. "Not exceptional, but passable." Our sommelier Jose happened to be walking by. He glanced at me with a raised eyebrow, the tiniest smirk threatening his usual calm expression. I gave him a subtle smile back. Jose had worked at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris and Tokyo. He'd turned down offers from Napa, London, and Sao Paulo to work with me. But sure, passable. So Allison said, trying to break the tension, "Ethan mentioned you've been working in food. What exactly do you do, Dara?" Before I could answer, Heather cut in. "She's probably hostessing somewhere, right? Using that business degree to hand out menus." My father chuckled. Everyone has to start somewhere. Though after 5 years, I would have expected some advancement. "I've advanced," I said quietly, into what Heather asked. "Assistant manager at Applebee's?" She laughed, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the sting of that laugh. I just felt bored of it. Heather thought she was cutting me down, but the truth. She had no idea how small she sounded. I didn't answer Heather's jab. I didn't need to. I took a sip of my wine, carefully selected to complement the scallops, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the power had shifted and she felt it, even if she didn't yet understand why. "And how's law treating you, Heather?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, still at Henderson and Block. Her expression tightened. "I'm between positions at the moment. She's taking time to plan the wedding." Bradley jumped in, ever the protector. I told her she doesn't need to burn herself out working at some firm. Once we're married, she can do charity work like my mother. There it was again, that flash in Heather's eyes, something between resentment and resignation. It vanished quickly, replaced with her usual placid smile. The third course arrived hand-rolled tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and mint, a dish I'd refined over the years until it became one of Maison's signatures. My mother stared at her plate. "These portion sizes," she sighed. "All this fuss for 3 bites. It's a tasting menu," I reminded her. "Each dish builds on the next. In my day," my father muttered, "restaurants gave you a proper meal for your money. This new cuisine nonsense is just a way to charge more for less." Bradley jabbed at the pasta with his knife, cutting the delicate strands instead of twirling them. So Heather said, voice sharp, "How are you affording this place? Maison isn't cheap." I didn't answer immediately. Heather leaned in, the faux concern gone from her tone. "Seriously, a dinner here costs more than you probably make in a week. Who's paying for you?" "I manage my finances carefully," I replied. "Oh, please," she scoffed. Are you maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances? Or is there some wealthy boyfriend footing the bill? I'm not dating anyone, I said evenly. Then how can you possibly afford this? She pushed. You don't have a trust fund. You don't have a real job. The table fell silent. Even my parents looked uneasy. Heather had crossed a line and everyone knew it. Heather, Ethan warned. No, I want to know, she insisted. We all rearranged our schedules for this dinner. Dara suggested the restaurant, one of the most exclusive in the city, and we're all pretending like it's normal that she can just show up here and dine like she belongs. The fourth course arrived duck breast with cherry gastrique and farro, cooked perfectly medium rare. Bradley took one bite, then grimaced. It's undercooked. It's medium rare, I said calmly. That's the optimal temperature for duck. I prefer mine well done, he declared, waving for the server. This is raw. Take it back. Jessica arrived just in time to catch his order without flinching. I gave her a quick nod. She knew what to do. Cook a new duck. Don't destroy the one we'd plated. As she walked away, my mother turned to me again. Dara, you still haven't answered Heather's question. How are you affording this dinner? She asked again, softer this time, but still demanding. I glanced around the table, suddenly transported to 100 other dinners in our home growing up. Same dynamic, same pressure, same subtle but unrelenting message. You are not enough. Bradley's new duck returned. This one was dry, stringy, and devoid of flavor. But he smiled smugly after a bite. Much better, he said. My father reached for the wine list. Let's order something more impressive, he said as Jose approached. This one should be adequate. He pointed to a Bordeaux $800. I knew the bottle intimately. I'd personally selected it from a vineyard in Saint-Emilion during a sourcing trip last year. It was spectacular, but completely wrong for duck. May I suggest something that pairs better? I started. I think I know my wines. Dara, my father, cut me off. Jose looked at me silently, awaiting instruction. I gave him a small nod. Let it go. This wasn't the hill to die on. As dessert arrived, a deconstructed lemon tart with basil sorbet, I could feel myself fading. Not from exhaustion, from restraint. Every dish was being dismantled, every word I spoke dismissed. And yet the table had no idea they were casually insulting the very person who made this entire evening possible. Then came the final act. Marcus approached, setting the black leather bill folder in front of my father. Reflexively, he reached for it, but Bradley intercepted. Please, Richard, he said smoothly. Allow me. Consider it my treat. My father waved his hand. As you wish. Bradley opened the folder and froze. His smile vanished. His eyes scanned the receipt again and again. Is there a problem? My father asked. No, just checking the total, Bradley murmured. Of course he was. Dinner for 7, premium wines, off-menu requests, plus that Bordeaux. Over $3,000 easy. He pulled out his card, one of those exclusive black tier types, and handed it to Marcus with a smug smirk. And that's when Heather struck again. So Dara, she said, her voice sugar-slick and poisonous, you never did tell us how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant dinner. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself financially on our account. And that was it. That was the last straw. The moment when the veil lifted and the truth was finally going to land, right on top of them. I could feel it, my heartbeat, slowing, my mind clearing as if I had reached the eye of the storm. Heather sat back in her chair, arms crossed, basking in the assumed victory of her insult. My mother looked vaguely uncomfortable but said nothing. My father was too busy selecting which dessert wine to try. Ethan stared down at his plate, the uneaten lemon tart now melting slightly into a pale yellow pool. And then Bradley frowned again at the check. Wait, he said, holding it up. There's a mistake here. They've only charged us for the beverages, not the food. The table stiffened. What my father asked. Bradley pointed. All the wine is here, but none of the courses are listed. That can't be right. He snapped his fingers toward Marcus. Excuse me. There's an error on this bill. I glanced up just in time to see Marcus approaching, calm as ever, leather apron, neatly pressed wine key at his side. I met his eyes and gave the faintest nod. It was time. Marcus came to a gentle stop beside the table. "Is there a problem?" Sir Bradley held out the receipt. "Yes. You've forgotten to charge us for the meal." Marcus took the folder, glanced at the slip, and turned to me. His smile shifted from professional politeness to something warmer, something real. "Welcome back, Miss Dara," he said. "Your usual table is ready for your meeting with the investors. Would you like me to handle this first?" The silence was instant and all-consuming. 6 pairs of eyes locked on me. My mother's lips parted, the color draining from her face. Heather blinked rapidly as if trying to refocus a dream that had taken a wrong turn. Ethan sat back in his chair, mouth slightly open. Bradley still had the receipt in his hand, suddenly more fragile than he'd ever looked. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice clear and even. "Yes, please, close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab. The rest is on the house as usual." "Very good, Miss Dara," Marcus replied, snapping the folder shut. "Chef Miranda mentioned she'd like your opinion on the spring menu revisions when you have a moment. I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting." I told him, still not looking at my family. He nodded and walked away, leaving a trail of stunned disbelief behind him. My mother was the first to speak, her voice strangled. What is happening?" I turned to her, looked at her. Not as her daughter, not as the failure she always pitied, but as an equal, as a force. "Welcome to Maison," I said, simply. "My restaurant." No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the soft hum of a jazz guitar drifting from the speakers overhead. My restaurant. I repeated this time with finality. "I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." My father's brow furrowed in disbelief. "You own this place?" I nodded. "Yes, I built it. I run it. Everything you've seen tonight, from the menu to the table layout to the lemon tart you didn't finish, it's all mine." Heather let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's not possible. This is one of the hardest restaurants to get into in Manhattan." "Yes," I said. "We were featured in Food and Wine last month. Before that, Bon Appetit. The New York Times gave us 4 stars last year." Bradley stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. "But you said you were just working in food." I was vague for a reason, I told him. "I wanted to see how you'd all treat me if you thought I was struggling." My mother clutched her pearls literally. It was her default nervous tic. "Darling, why wouldn't you tell us about this?" She was using her coaxing tone now, the one she deployed at galas when the wrong people ended up on the guest list, the one that always meant, "How do we fix this before it becomes embarrassing?" "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. "Would you have respected me then?" Because up until dessert, all I heard tonight were reminders that my path wasn't worthy. But "This is an achievement," my father said, trying to recast the evening with a revisionist tone. "It changes everything." "No," I said. "It changes nothing except how you see me now, that you know I'm successful." Heather was still frozen mouth slightly agape, her engagement ring catching the light in a way that suddenly looked a little less dazzling. But "You let us sit here and mock everything," she said, her voice cracking with something between embarrassment and anger. "You let us criticize the food, the wine. You let me insult you. Why would you do that?" I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who had once shared my secrets, my childhood laughter, and later my deepest wounds. Because I wanted to see, I said quietly, how you would treat me if you still thought I was the family failure. Bradley finally spoke up, voice strained. "That's manipulative. More manipulative than asking me if I was maxing out credit cards to afford dinner, or implying I was dating someone rich to sit at your table." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. I turned my gaze to my mother. "And you, Mother, you asked why I didn't tell you. But when I did tell you about culinary school 5 years ago, what did you say?" She looked away. "You said it was beneath our family, that I could pursue my little hobby without your support, financial or otherwise. That's why I didn't tell you. Because it never mattered to you unless it elevated your image." My father cleared his throat like he was shifting into damage control mode. Now, Dara, let's be fair. We were concerned about your stability, your future. If we'd known you had this kind of business acumen, that's the problem, I interrupted. You only value success when it looks like yours. Just then, Chef Miranda appeared at my side in her crisp white jacket. Sorry to interrupt, Dara, she said gently, but the Matsuhisa party has arrived for their tasting, and SA confirmed the interview for next week's Gourmet Journal feature. Also, your publisher called they need final approval on the cookbook cover. I nodded. Thanks, Miranda. I'll be there in 10. She nodded back, casting a brief, curious glance at the stunned faces around the table before disappearing into the kitchen. Cookbook Heather echoed like she'd just been punched in the stomach by a word she didn't understand. Coming out this fall, I said. Kopi Publishing. 120 recipes each with personal essays and stories. My mother suddenly stood voice softer than I'd heard in years. Dara, darling, this is all so impressive. Why didn't you tell us sooner? We would have helped. Supported you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Really? You would have supported me, like when I told you I wanted to cook and you cut me off financially. When you refused to speak to me for a year because I'd embarrassed the family name. When Heather laughed in my face and Ethan couldn't even look at me. That was years ago, she said quickly. We've changed. Have you? I asked, looking around the table. Because until 5 minutes ago, you still saw me as someone you could condescend to. Bradley leaned in again, suddenly perking up. A cookbook deal. A restaurant like this. You must be bringing in serious revenue. Have you considered expansion, a restaurant group? My firm, I held up a hand. No, I'm not looking for investors. I'm doing just fine. And I didn't build this to get your approval or your money. Heather's jaw tightened. So all this time, you've been sitting on this empire while letting us believe you were struggling. I tilted my head. And what would have changed if I told you the truth? Would you have respected me? Or would you have found a new way to remind me I'm not like you? No one answered. Because they knew. Because that had been the point all along. I stood slowly adjusting my dress. I have a business to run, I said simply. Thank you for dining tonight. I turned to go, but behind me a flurry of movement. Dara, wait, my mother called after me. I paused, turned. She looked cracked. Like the image she'd clung to for decades was finally slipping from her fingers. You can't just leave. We need to talk. This changes things. Does it? I asked. Or does it just change how comfortable you feel around me now? The rest of the family had risen now, hovering in a tight, awkward circle near the bar. Ethan looked at me, his expression almost pleading. Dar, can we just have dinner sometime? Just us, you and me. I'd really like to see your kitchen. I want my kids to know there's more than one way to succeed. Of all the things said that night that hit the hardest, real, unscripted, sincere. I nodded once. I'd like that. My mother stepped forward again, more tentative now. Maybe we could have brunch this weekend, as a family. No expectations, just a chance to understand. I hesitated, and then I nodded again. Okay, I said. But not at your club. There's a place in the East Village I want you to try. Hole in the wall, mismatched chairs, no linen service. They blinked. We'll be there, my mother said quickly. I smiled faintly. Good. I think it's time you experienced what real food tastes like without judging the plates first. As they gathered their things and drifted out of Maison, I watched them go. Their posture had changed. Their perspective had shifted. And I was finally standing in the light of my own truth. 2 weeks passed like a blur. Between spring menu rollouts, cookbook meetings, and early talks with a second location investor, I didn't have much time to reflect. But somehow, the events of that dinner refused to fade. They lived rent-free in my head, in the silence before the kitchen opened in the quiet hours after closing. When the walk-in hummed, and I sat alone in my office with a glass of Syrah and a notebook full of scribbled menu concepts. What surprised me most wasn't how cathartic the reveal had been, but how human their reactions were once the veil dropped. It wasn't applause or awe I remembered most. It was how uncomfortable my father looked when he realized he'd lost control of the narrative, how Heather blinked, stunned when her power games no longer worked, how my mother, for the first time in my adult life, didn't have a tidy little phrase to explain away my choices. That was the real shift. Not in my resume, but in the dynamic. For once, they had nothing left to measure me against. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be measurable. I had already won. But perhaps what caught me most off guard was what came after, Sunday brunch. I'd picked Alma's, a no-frills gem run by a former colleague hidden in the East Village, the kind of place my parents used to scoff at mismatched silverware, a chalkboard menu, no valet parking. My mother arrived in pearls naturally. My father wore a blazer even though it was 75 degrees outside. Ethan came with his 2 kids in tow, and Heather surprised me. She wore jeans, designer, sure, but jeans. She hugged me when we greeted each other, not one of those stiff cheek-to-cheek socialite taps, a real one, awkward, unpolished, but real. The meal was simple. Shakshuka roasted sweet potatoes sourdough from a local bakery. My father looked confused at first, no menu, no prefix, but when he bit into the eggs and sourdough and made a small, involuntary noise of delight, I knew. They got it. Slowly. Tentatively. But they got it. This is... Really? Something he said, wiping his mouth. My mother nodded. Who knew simple eggs could taste like this? I smiled. Turns out food doesn't need to wear a tuxedo to matter. There were still barbed comments here and there. Reflexes are hard to unlearn, but they felt softer now. Less like weapons, more like habits being slowly broken. After that meal, my father emailed me a link to an article. Top 10 female chefs redefining fine dining. No comment. Just a link. But I knew what it meant. Heather texted me about a florist quote for her wedding. Is this normal? She wrote, attaching a blurry screenshot. Can we meet for coffee? I need someone who gets the chaos. And Ethan. He came to Maison last Thursday. Just him and his 2 kids. Sat at table 6 near the window. I gave them a tour of the kitchen. Let the kids taste lemon thyme sorbet straight from the batch freezer. I want them to see all the paths he said. Not just the ones that come with family pressure. Of all of them, Ethan had changed the most. He saw me now. Not as the quirky sister, not as the family deviation, but as someone who had built something powerful, beautiful, and real. And that meant more than any apology. Back at Maison, life moved forward. My staff, who'd known bits and pieces of my family backstory, didn't ask questions, but their respect deepened. I could feel it in how Marcus offered to manage future surprise reservations, in how Jessica subtly added a filter to guest screening requests, in how Chef Miranda simply said, "Good for you," and handed me the updated tasting menu draft. And Zoe, my youngest kitchen intern, pulled me aside one day after the dinner rush. "Chef," she said, holding a tray of freshly piped pita choux, "your story. The one you lived, I just wanted to say." I needed to see that. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Zoe had come to us from a youth culinary initiative in the Bronx. Quiet, sharp, a sponge for technique. And like me, she carried a weight that had nothing to do with kitchen work. I saw the fire in her, the ache for something more. That's why I'd started the mentorship program. Every Saturday morning before the restaurant opened, we turned the Maison kitchen into a school. 8 students, 8 stations, a dozen dreams suspended in steamed citrus and roux. I never told my family about the mentorship program, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need their validation anymore. I was no longer living to be seen. I was living to serve, to create, to teach, to feed in the most honest way I knew how. My publisher, Kopi, had just sent over the final proofs for the cookbook. I'd stared at the title page for hours, stuck on the dedication. Finally, I wrote, "For the ones who cooked alone at first. May your table be full, your hands calloused, and your voice heard." That night, after final service and cleanup, I sat at my usual table in the corner of the dining room. Lights dimmed, kitchen closed. Only the quiet clink of glassware being polished in the back remained. My phone buzzed. A text from Heather. The wedding venue tried to pull a bait and switch. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need someone who doesn't lie to my face." I smiled. Progress, I suppose. Then another notification. My mother. The Mitchell Foundation is hosting a gala next month. Would you consider catering? I want them to see your brilliance. She was trying. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even always pretty. But it was effort. And effort, however clumsy, meant more than silence ever had. I typed a quick reply. Let's talk this weekend. At my place, casual brunch. You bring the stories, I'll bring the lemon tart. And for once, I didn't reread the message twice before hitting send. As I sat in the warm quiet of the restaurant, I built my restaurant watching the city lights flicker beyond the tall windows. I realized something simple, profound, and almost laughably overdue. I had stopped performing, stopped fighting for a seat at their table, because I had created my own, and now they were finally asking for a reservation. Success is loud, or so I'd been taught. It looks like headlines and ribbon cuttings. It smells like old money cologne and whispers at garden parties. It walks tall, speaks crisp, and earns its way into charity boards with practiced ease. But the truth, my truth, success is quiet. It smells like browned butter and thyme at 2 a.m. It sounds like your line cook humming after the fifth 14-hour shift of the week. It feels like steam clinging to your skin in a walk-in freezer, your eyes closed, because you finally nailed the perfect texture on a duck breast. It's not pretty, it's not comfortable, and it rarely photographs well, but it's real. And for me, that quiet kind of success, the one that doesn't need applause, was what truly mattered. After the family dinner at Maison, after the brunch at Alma's, after the slowly unraveling pretense that had defined most of my childhood things began to shift inside me, not just with my family, with me. I had spent so many years chasing their approval, even after pretending I didn't care. Every milestone came with a whisper in the back of my head. Would this make them proud? Would this finally count? But the night they left my restaurant, I went back into the kitchen, not to celebrate, to work. I helped Miranda break down the stations, took the compost out, sat on a milk crate next to Zoe while she recapped her prep list for Saturday's mentorship. And that was the moment I realized this right here is what I love. The doing, not the proving, the folding of dough, the sharpening of knives, the evolution of young talent into confident creators, the quiet, the peace. I was no longer building a life they could recognize. I was building a life I could feel, a life that wasn't polished for cocktail parties, but rich in depth, in failure, in grit, and in meaning. When I looked around at my staff at Marcus, with his meticulous polish at Jessica, with her unwavering composure at Miranda's intense brilliance, I didn't see employees. I saw my family, the one I chose, the one I built. Some nights I stayed late after everyone else left, not because I had to, but because the quiet hum of the refrigerators, the scent of cooling lemon zest, and the comfort of stainless steel gave me clarity no therapy session ever had. I stopped asking questions like, will they ever see me? Instead, I asked, am I proud of this? The answer was finally yes. One night, I found myself staring at an old photo tucked behind the corkboard in my office. A photo of Elena, our housekeeper back in Connecticut, smiling in our family's old kitchen with flour on her cheek and her hands deep in dough. I was maybe 10 in the picture beside her eyes, wide with wonder. She'd been the first person to tell me I had the hands for this, long before anyone else saw anything in me. I took that photo and framed it, put it right next to the pass window, the final checkpoint before a dish left the kitchen. Every staff member could see it now. That photo wasn't a tribute to nostalgia. It was a cornerstone, a reminder of the day someone told me I was enough, not because I looked polished or because my grades impressed a room, but because I felt something that couldn't be taught. A few days later, Ethan brought his kids back to the restaurant, just the 3 of them. He let them run around the closed kitchen, wide-eyed and barefoot, marveling at copper pots and towers of plated amuse-bouches. When Zoe walked in and saw them, she immediately knelt beside Ethan's daughter, offering her a spoonful of lavender whipped cream, fresh from the siphon. The little girl gasped. It tastes like flowers. And I realized then, this was the legacy I was building. Not the Mitchell name, not the weight of institutions or Ivy League expectations, but a space where people could taste joy, learn craft, speak their truth through flavor. After they left, Ethan sent me a simple message. Thank you for showing them that success doesn't come in just one flavor. I stared at that message for a long time before replying. Took me 29 years to believe that myself. There were still calls from my mother, mostly cautious now. She'd ask about the cookbook release date, ask if I was properly protected legally with Maison's trademarks. Old habits die hard. But she asked, with a tone I'd never heard before, curiosity, not control, Heather. She texted me a photo of a badly overcooked filet from a catering tasting followed by help. They're serving this at my wedding, unless you save me. I laughed so loud in the middle of prep, I nearly dropped a pan of creme anglaise. I texted back, I'll help, but only if you admit I know what I'm doing. She replied instantly, you know more than any of us ever gave you credit for. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't redemption. But it was a beginning. And this time, it was on my terms. Some stories end with thunderous applause. Mine ended in the quiet of my restaurant long after the last guest had left, with the sound of pages turning. The cookbook was finally finished. The galley proof sat in my lap as I lounged at table 12, my favorite spot tucked just enough into the corner to watch the whole room, but hidden enough to disappear if I needed to. The linen was folded, the candles snuffed, and the soft clinking of glassware being polished in the back felt like a lullaby. I flipped to the introduction, the words I'd wrestled with more than any recipe. Food has always been my truest language. When words failed, I spoke through flavor. When I felt lost, I followed my palate. These recipes aren't just instructions. They're chapters, memories, proof that passion, when followed with honesty and grit, becomes something more nourishing than acceptance. It becomes truth. I closed the book gently and set it down. That night, I didn't toast to the Mitchell name, or to magazine spreads, or expansion capital. I toasted to the scar on my left hand from slicing too fast at 2 a.m., to the burn on my wrist that never quite faded, to the calluses from mixing dough when the machine broke, to the tears shed in back alleys behind service doors, when tips were low and critics were cruel. Because those moments had built me far more than my last name ever had. Success isn't a spotlight, it's a slow burn. And mine had been earned the hard way, plate by plate, hour by hour, year by year. And it was mine alone. That's what I realized the most after that dinner with my family. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. They had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me. They'd given me limits, and I'd shattered them. Now, when my mother calls, we talk less about status and more about spice. She recently asked for my lemon tart recipe, said she wanted to try it for her book club. I sent it along with a handwritten note, but no substitutions. Trust the acid. She sent back a picture of the tart slightly burned on the edges and a text that simply said, okay, maybe I'll leave it to you. We're learning. Slowly. Heather's wedding is next month. I'll be there not as the culinary black sheep, but as the proud sister who offered to host the rehearsal dinner. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to. Because I've learned that generosity rooted in confidence, not obligation, is a gift, not a performance. My father still sends me articles, still says things like, "You've really become quite the entrepreneur." But now there's something new in his voice when he says it. Humility. As if he finally understands that success doesn't always come in a tailored suit or an Ivy League degree. Sometimes it wears an apron and smells like rosemary and reduction sauce. As for me, I keep showing up, to the kitchen, to the people I serve, to the young chefs who remind me of the girl I once was burning with hunger for something more than approval. I watch them taste their first perfect béarnaise, see the pride flicker in their eyes. That's what legacy means to me now, not a family name in gold lettering on a donation wall, but a line cook whispering, "I didn't think I could do this," until I did. So if you're listening to this wondering if chasing your dream is worth the silence, the judgment, the loneliness, let me be the voice that says yes, it's worth it, because you are. And one day, if you stay true long enough, you might just find yourself at a table surrounded by the very people who once doubted you, finally learning to taste the truth you've been serving all along. And when that day comes, you won't need their applause, because you'll already be clapping for yourself. Have you ever had to choose between following your heart and meeting someone else's expectations? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, and send it to someone who might need the reminder. The only approval you truly need is your own. Thank you for listening.